Hi, everyone. I'm E. I use they, them pronouns. I am the founder of Queering Education. I'm so excited to have you all with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Grant to introduce himself and talk about what he's going to tell us today.
Thank you guys so much for having me here today. My name is Grant E. Lovelace. I am here today to talk about how to empower voices for LGBTQ IA2 plus youth in the Austin community. And so I am just excited.
Awesome. Yeah, so if you're ready, I guess you can go ahead and jump right into your presentation. And we'll be here to moderate the chat and everything. So all of you who are watching, feel free to drop questions in either the Q&A or the chat, and we'll make sure those get answered at the end of this presentation.
So this session today is called Our Existence is Resistance, is Our Time, and We Are Claiming Our Space. So today we'll be looking over intersectionality, equity, and inclusion, how to utilize social media to create the impact that is needed to ensure that we are creating safe spaces for LGBTQ youth of color to feel celebrated, needed, and heard. So, who am I? My name is Grant E. Lovelace. I am an Afro-queer, non-binary student, youth advocate, and social entrepreneur here in the beautiful city of Austin. And I have been doing work within community activism and social entrepreneurship for 3 years now. I started all the way back in high school when I created an organization to address the needs and issues for LGBTQ students that were being bullied and harassed. And so through that, I just started doing a lot of different work within the nonprofit sector and being involved in my community. And then it just propelled when I went to college at Austin Community College. I'm currently transferring over to Texas State University as a junior to dual major in psychology and mass communication. And so that's me. And so just to jump right into it, what is intersectionality? So as you can see to your right, it has a definition of what intersectionality is, which is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. And so I would urge you all to definitely take a read at Kimberly Crenshaw's 1989 essay entitled Mapping the Margins, Intersectionality, Identity, Politics, and Violence Against Women of Color, as she coined the term, and the essay is a beautiful one as she talks about what it means to be a Afro-queer feminists. So for me, using me as an example, intersectionality is used to discuss how complex humans really are, to look at how each of our identities, whether it's race, religion, class, gender, or sexuality, and how those different identities all come into one, and how from those different components to our identity are different experiences that we go through. And so through these experiences, they can either come from, or we can confront or discuss or unpack racism, homophobia, transphobia, colorism, ethocentrism, and various other isms. So using me as an example, I'm a Christian, Afro-Caribbean, pansexual, non-binary, middle-class person in this beautiful world that we live in. So how does this attribute to who I am today? Well, using the concept of intersectionality, we utilize these different components of my identity or from your identity to figure out how they contribute to the way we live, to the experiences that we confront, and to um, how do we contribute back to society with these different intersections. and also discussing how we can become more comfortable when discussing our intersectional identities. So I would definitely urge everyone just to do like a little brain dump and just look into how intersectionality can apply to your life, and looking at the different components of your identity and seeing how they have contributed or what experiences you have faced with those different components and if they do in fact intersect. Next, I want to, so for the rest of the slide, where it's going to be more of a conversation between I and you all. Basically, we'll just be talking about equity and inclusion and various other things. So for me, I would love to hear about what you all define equity and inclusion as, whether it is in your communities, at homes, in schools, in your workspaces. How have you yourself seen equity, inclusion, or identified it? Or how would you define equity and inclusion? And so for me, um, I've I've identified within my 3 years of work that inclusion is based on power, voice, and organizational structure. And equity is equatable to results, whether it's policy, practice, or the position that I or any other of my colleagues, friends, or you all take in the world. And what is confusing about equity is that it can always be confused with equality. So, just to briefly go over it, equality is looking at, is giving the same opportunities or resources to anyone, no matter the individual needs. Whereas with equity, we assess the individual needs and distribute resources and opportunities based on said needs. And the reason why equity is very important, as well as inclusion, is because it does give the breathing room for more opportunity, ideas, perspectives, insights, and voices to be amplified, uplifted, and heard. Because too often do we see nonprofit boards or state, city, nationwide commission um, boards and task forces exclude different people of color, youth, trans, and LGBTQ people from having a seat at the table. And so when we talk about equity, it comes in a question about how do we identify if an organization or a business um, is equitable or inclusive. And of course, I would always say that the first way to identify that is by looking at their mission and values, by looking at their team members. For example, I just joined Austin Young Chamber. And while talking to the president at Austin Young Chamber, she emphasized the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion as the majority of the chairs or the people that are leading some of their initiatives and programs there are non people of color, and also not affiliated or an ally of the LGBTQ community. So it's a question of how can we bring that structure of equity and inclusion to the table. We could bring equity and inclusion to the table by one, as I said before, identifying those needs. If we see that uh, the boards or the task forces or the commissions do not have people of color or fair representation of the community, whether it's LGBTQ or racialized communities, we then bring that need to the people that are part of the organization, whether they're the board members, whether they are on the ground working, and discussing those needs and how we can bring those needs into the organization and implement structures of equity and inclusion. And then the last thing is following up and ensuring that those structures stay in place, or creating a program or an accelerator to ensure that those things are in place. Whether it is by being a part or running for a board member seat or running for a city council seat, um, just ensuring that there is fair representation in your district, in your city, in your communities, in your schools, or in your neighborhoods to make sure that everyone is getting the same opportunities and resources. Following up is the importance of safe spaces for LGBTQIA2 plus youth. In high school, I had, before I even thought of creating an organization for LGBTQ youth at my high school, within my junior year, I began to see a counselor, not counselor, but funny thing, Out Youth had a coach or a guidance counselor implemented at the school that would hold different healing circles and conversations with LGBTQ students at the school. Within those conversations and having my one-on-one with the counselor, I can say that for me, that was the safe space I needed to grow and develop the skills that I needed to, basically start that organization and group at my school. And the safe spaces are, of course, important because you need to give youth a place to speak, to have their voices and experiences heard. Because too often lack are there a lack of safe spaces or a lack thereof of spaces where youth can, of course, feel welcome, loved, heard, and celebrated. And so, creating the organization at my high school, at first, I went to, I identified the need, of course, and I went to the principal. Like, really, I was bold. Okay. I walked up to the principal's office and knocked on the door. No appointment. I was really crazy. Um, and I talked to the principal. I said, this is an issue that we are having at the school. And of course, my high school always promoted No Place for Hate. I believe it was a program. And from this conversation, he said, well, at the time, we really can't assess the needs of these students. We're focusing on other things, but we can definitely delve into this in the future. So basically, it was a no. And so what I did from there, I found a sponsor to be to I would call it oversee the organization. And from that, I gathered at least 10 to 20 students to be a part of the organization. And then sadly, I had to leave my senior year, and I had to leave because I graduated. And it sadly got dissolved. But from the work that we did from my junior and senior year, we were the first LGBTQ group in the Maynard district. We were in yearbooks, and we created the change that we wanted to see by having workshops and events about what it meant to be an ally, what it means to be LGBTQU in such a country, um, in a country setting. Um, and also the workshops help identify and kind of shape the way that the city of Maynard, approaches and addresses the needs of youth when it does come to being LGBTQ or a person of color and how they should attend to those needs. Now, talking about creating a seat at the table, that's just a great leeway into this. Creating a seat at the table is all about those three steps: identifying the need, um, approaching a person about the need or the group about the need, and then, of course, making sure that program, that annual event, or that semester-based event is still up and running. And so when we are creating these seats at the table, we need to ensure that they're equitable and inclusive, that we do have a diverse amount of voices at the table, especially for our youth. And funny enough, I was talking to one of my friends earlier today, and she was having an issue with an organization what is it, in New York, where she was trying to get a task force together to create a survey to assess the health needs of people affected by COVID-19. And she said that nonprofits, boards, commissions, and stuff wouldn't take her survey into consideration. And she asked me what she can do. Of course, my first idea was, send it out, talk about how you're being rejected and how you're not being brought to a table on these issues. Create an article, submit it. But I also urged her to create her own seat, create her own table, and bring people to the table. Whether it's creating a small group or your own organization, finding people that have the same mission or similar mindset or view on those health needs, and bringing them to the table and constructing your own table, because sometimes we are unable to have a seat at the table. It's a harsh truth, but it is true. Um, and sometimes we are not allowed to have a seat at the table. And so, ways that we can actually construct our own table is one, identifying that need. And that will always be the number one in regards to equity, inclusion, creating a seat at the table, and creating safe spaces for LGBTQ youth, identifying the need, whether no matter what it is, just finding out what the need is in that community, in that school, in your workspace, and thriving and striving with it. And after you create your table, you need to set the mission, the values, what will you do, and what are key things that you are wanting to do. As I was doing with a nonprofit, what are your deliverables? Do you want to do a public awareness campaign? And if you do your survey, how do you want your survey to impact others? What communities do you want to impact? Are you looking at impacting racialized communities or marginalized and disadvantaged communities? How do you want your survey to impact the way that we address and approach health needs in the midst of COVID? And so when creating a seat at the table, it's that discussion about how can we do it, when can we do it, and not how, but what people can we bring to the table to help assess what the needs that must be met in our communities. So then, social media and community impact. So I'm huge on social media. I've been doing social media work since 2019, like 2 years ago, a year ago, when I started working for Measure Austin, which is a nonprofit that utilizes data and education to mobilize communities to disrupt and dismantle social inequities. So, with Measure and various other nonprofits and businesses, I've worked on um, ways to strategies on how they can impact their communities utilizing social media. So, questions I always ask are these right here when coming to a nonprofit about these questions about how they can impact their community or re engage or engage with youth in their communities. What social media platforms do you currently have that holds impact? So, using me yet again as an example, I utilize my Facebook and Instagram the most, primarily Facebook, and my Facebook holds the most impact from what I've seen. Um, and even in the midst of creating your own platform as an individual, as a social entrepreneur, as an artist, as a creator, you have to identify: do you have a platform, and how do you engage with others on your platform? And do you have, or are you part of an organization or business um, that helps amplify your voice and your platform, or uplifts and supports it in various ways, whether it's sharing your posts, making sure that you are a part of these said conversations, and um, putting the fuel to the fire, and enabling, and not enabling, but making sure that your peers, and whoever else you want to bring up on your platform, voices are being heard. Next is, how do you show solidarity for various causes that impact you and your community? A lot of times, in the midst of what's going on in our socio-political climate, we have seen various um, businesses, corporations, celebrities, community leaders, influencers show solidarity for the Black Lives Matter movement, or the All Black Lives Matter movement, by going on IG Live or Facebook Live, or donating to petitions. I'm not donating to petitions. I'm donating to causes online, or signing online petitions, or sharing those online petitions. Showing solidarity comes in many different forms in various ways. Next, we ask, how can you start building an impact on your social media? We ask, how can you start building an impact on your social media? So if you haven't yet, you can start building an impact on your social media once again by identifying, what do you want to do? What are your passions? What is your why? What is your vision? How do you want to best contribute to your community? For example, if I was interested in animal rights, or was an advocate for, or well, I'm just say interested. If I was interested in animal rights, how can I start building my impact on social media to create change in the animal rights sector? I don't know much about animal rights, so please work with me, y'all. But if I wanted to, I could go on Facebook and Instagram and start connecting with groups and individuals and influencers that do the work already with animal rights and tell them I'm interested in being a part. I'm interested in helping. I'm interested in learning more about how to assist in this movement for animal rights. And it's all about identifying, what do you want to do? What is your why? And how can you turn your curiosities into opportunities? Next is, oh, I miss. How can you find your niche or community to assist you in constructing your foundation? So that goes back to the previous question. You can find your niche or your community just by finding what grinds your gears, what gets you up out of the bed, what makes you angry, what makes you passionate, what makes you want to voice your opinion or your ideas or your insight, or makes you want to tell your story. So often do we have a lot of different issues in the world where we can relate to. So what can you relate to in your, and how can you find a community that also has that same relativity? And how can you connect with them and build with them and grow with them and do beautiful things with them? Because after you find your niche, or your community to assist you, you can then start beginning your foundation. And so, altogether, social media has and will always hold an impact to it. It's just, how do we utilize our social media platforms, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, uh, Twitter, Reddit? How do we utilize those platforms for the change we want to see? And so, one quote that I want to bring up to you all is by my favorite author and change maker, James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. In my presentation thus far, just discussing with you all about, how do we engage with youth? How do we find our community? How do we create these safe spaces? And how do I identify or implement structures of equity and inclusion to ensure sustainable change? This quote just sums it all up. Because not everything that is faced can be changed. And that's another harsh truth. But nothing can be changed until it is faced. So when you do see an issue in your workspace, in your communities, at school, or in your home, or in your neighborhood, what can you do with the platform that you have or the platform that you want to create? How can you address and approach that need and create the change that is needed, um, to make it a better, uh, to create a better culture, a culture that's equitable, a culture that's inclusive, and a culture that brings not only people together in a unified way, but brings people to have those difficult conversations about the need for change. Because too often do some people like to be comfortable, and they don't want to change. They don't want to see change. They don't want to see change implemented. They don't want to see an event that even creates or taught or creates dialogue about change. So yes. So yeah, my presentation was short, y'all. But but altogether, so altogether, learning about what intersectionality is, about equity and inclusion, and what social media is, we can all learn how to make our existence a resistance. because our existence is based off of intersectionality, finding out how we can be Black and queer and Christian, and how we could delve into the different communities and create the change that we want to see. And from this presentation, I want you all to leave with the importance of amplifying the amplifying youth voices, and knowing how to construct a table, or how to construct your own seat to bring youth and their peers to the table, and understanding that it is always possible to turn your curiosities into opportunities, and that through this you or anybody that you come in contact with, or youth that you know of, can become catalysts of change. And yes, that's my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was like a lot of really important information to share, I think, especially for not only the youth who want to get involved in community organizing and things, but also, everyone who supports them, all of the other organizations and people who want to focus on creating these safe spaces. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I still want to invite our attendees to ask questions if you have any. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage folks to ask questions in the chat as well. Grant, I had a couple of questions that came up for me. One was like, how do you deal with those things that you are facing that can't be changed? Like, how do you work through that?
I would say just showing up, um, and making sure that my presence is known, because of course some things just can't be changed, but what can be changed is, of course, the people that we are bringing to the table, the people that are being seen, heard. And for example, at UT Austin, a school here in the city of Austin, um, they have had a lot of different issues relating to racism and homophobia and transphobia with their students. And the culture of racism at UT Austin has been there for centuries. I'm not gonna say centuries, like it's a million years old, but it's been there for a long time. And so the way that I and many other students or youth or community leaders have been able to shift the paradigm or create the change we want to see at UT Austin is just by showing up, creating those conversations and those dialogues, creating those events, and showing that even though UT Austin, the board and the school itself will never, I'm not gonna say will never, but that it will be hard for them to actually change that culture of racism by passing policies that will create a better culture for Black, Indigenous students of color. But it's about showing up and making sure that you know that we're here and that we're not going to stop showing up, that we will keep doing events and programs and initiatives. And I think that's what it's all about.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. The follow up to that is like, how do you personally like take care of yourself when you're doing all this activism and all this work? Like, how do you like keep up your energy, your momentum? Like, how do you take care of yourself?
So I'll be honest with everyone. um, so with self-care, I write, I go outside, I eat Oreos a lot. Oreos is like my peace, if I'm being for real. Like Oreos has always been my peace of mind since I was in middle school. Like Oreos will always be me. So I would always say, find out what makes you feel at home, what makes you feel at peace, no matter where you are. Because there's been situations to where I've been at an event and someone or something would have me just behooved, okay? And and just knowing that I do have a community behind me, or that I do have Oreos right beside me, does help me in refocusing why I am here in this space, why I am here, and continuously showing up. And self-care is always number one, whether you're an activist, an advocate, an entrepreneur, an artist, a creator, whatever you are in this beautiful world. self-care always has to be number one, and you always have to ensure that you are making sure you yourself are a top priority. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you take care of others?
Yeah, for sure. And I see a question that popped up in the Q&A box. Someone said, how can you work towards building a platform if you don't have one? So if you want to talk about that, both through like a social media perspective and also just generally in activism, what that looks like.
Absolutely. In a general sense, for me, when coming out of high school, going into college, I was really out here looking crazy, because I had a lot of different ideas about what I wanted to do, and I didn't really know how I wanted to do it. So I know, like, when I first got there, I was like, you know what, I want to have a whole jubilee for Black Indigenous people, students here at the school, because they haven't had one. I mean, who doesn't like having a jubilee? And with that idea, I had to think about, do I have a platform? How can I get in touch with people? How can I start building my own platform? And from an article that I wrote a month or two ago, I talk about identifying your why and identifying your own passions, and stepping right into community activism. Everything, you know how you show like a child something shiny and they immediately get attracted to it? So I was involved in everything my freshman year of college. I was involved in mental health, holistic healing, yoga. I was the director of communications for an engineering group. I'm not even an engineer. It doesn't make sense. And so I wanted to create impact in every single way I could. And through that, I found out how to create my own platform. And I did that by, one, identifying what I wanted to do. And I knew for a fact I wanted to work with students. That was just period. That was like the bottom line. I want to work with youth and students to make sure they are successful and succeeding. And after identifying that, I started thinking about what nonprofits are currently doing the work. And there was Measure Austin, there was What's in the Mirror, there was Austin Justice Coalition, there was Out Youth, and various other organizations out there that were interacting and contributing to youth and student success. And so I just reached out to them. My Facebook and my Instagram is probably bare. Actually, my Instagram was kind of crazy. My Instagram name used to be Slim Thick Ambition, but when I started getting activism, I had to kind of reshape my social media and I did that in order to better understand not only myself, but better what do you call it? Better connect with people, because what I had on my Instagram way back when, if it was now, oh no. And so if you don't have a platform, I would definitely say start looking at doing asset mapping, basically, about what organizations are currently doing the work for what you're passionate about. Looking at how, if you do create an Instagram or Facebook, how can you connect with people who are team members or a part of those nonprofits and organizations, and ask those questions about how did they get started in their journey? Who did they connect to? And just snowballing and finding those opportunities and resources for what you want to do. Because creating a platform is all about collaboration and connection. And ensuring that when you do reach out to these people, that you do have a genuine interest in learning about animal rights, about equity and inclusion, about youth and student success, mental health, and various other things.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. That's really great feedback. Um, I think I had sort of a similar experience when I was getting started in the activism world. I had been mostly involved in things in high school, and then I started using social media more. And it was sort of like a fake it till you make it thing at the beginning. I had like 20 Instagram followers and I acted like I was famous. And then eventually, my account grew and then I had more people on social media. And also with like creating a platform, definitely just going to community events and stuff and meeting people and, just starting to form those connections and forming a network of folks who are doing the kinds of work that you're interested in and the kind of work that you want to do is super important. So, yeah.
And I would also like to add in, like, briefly, you should you should always connect your passions to what you want to do. And I was just talking about this the other day. For example, if you are a photographer and you say, man, I want to do something in my community that's impactful, take pictures of the injustices in your community and create a book. If you are great at writing, write articles, and start contributing to magazines and blogs about your experiences in your community. If you love to dance, think about how you could turn your dance into something that tells a story about injustice or inequity in your community. Because there's always a way to intersect your passions with social justice or with any cause that you want to advocate for.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess if folks don't have other questions, we can wrap up a little early, give people a little bit of their night back. Yeah, so thank you so much for doing this. This was a really awesome presentation, a lot of great information to come away with. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I am going to drop a couple of links in the chat. We have a feedback form that I'm pulling up the link for. If the attendees want to let us know how you felt about this session, for some reason, it's not turning itself into a link, but if you go to feedback.queering.education, that's the place to go for that. And then I'm also going to drop our donation link because we want to make sure that we're able to keep this project going and that we can continue to pay our speakers for all of the work that they're doing and all of the amazing things that they are contributing to this project. So if you are so inclined, the donation link is also in the chat. But thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you'll join us next week. We have a lot of other great content that you can see on our calendar at queering.education/calendar.
Thanks so much. Have a good night, y'all.
Thank you guys so much for coming out.